Hello, friends. Welcome to The Big Talk. We have talked about the power of story on this show many times, and by sharing your story, how you can change and even save a life. What about the storyteller? On this season, we are going to dive deep into how sharing our personal stories can actually change and transform our own lives. And I am super excited today to welcome our featured guest, the incredible Ashley Stahl. Ashley, are you ready to drop in?
Yes, I am.
Ashley Stahl is a counter-terrorism professional turned career coach, speaker, and author of the book U-Turn, on a mission to help you step into a career or business you're excited about and aligned with. Through her 2 viral TEDx speeches, her email list of 500,000, and her show, U-Turn podcast, she's been able to support clients in 31 countries in discovering their best career path, upgrading their confidence, and landing more job offers. She maintains a monthly career column in Forbes, and her work has also been featured in outlets such as the Wall Street Journal, CBS, Self, the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, and more. Ashley's earned a master's in international relations from King's College London and another master's in spiritual psychology from the University of Santa Monica. She holds a bachelor's from University of Redlands in government history and French. For free career resources and a quiz to discover your best career fit, stick around. She's going to tell you where to find this, and of course, we'll put it all in the show notes. Ashley, take a minute to fill us in on anything I missed and talk a little about you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. That was quite the intro there. You didn't really miss much there, but then again, as people, we're such complex beings with so many different facets. And I would say the story that my biography doesn't tell is one that I write about in my book, U-Turn, which is really about the reality that I worked really hard for my career in counterterrorism and ended up not being a fit for me. And I think so many of us use our degrees as excuses to kind of go a certain route, and we forget that our degree or our education or the time we've spent in our career is there to serve us. We're not there to serve it. We don't need to keep doing something just because we have. And so in my case, I think what my bio doesn't really share is what I really went through to make that shift from who I was being to who I actually am.
I love this because the power of story is something that our listeners are really interested in. They want to tell their stories. They want to learn how to tell their stories. They know how important telling your story is in terms of reaching other people. When you're in a business, a field like counterterrorism, and it's so important, the work is so important, how do you give yourself permission to let go of that story and create your new one?
Mm-hmm. I think now as a career expert, one thing I see very clearly in retrospect is that just because something is important or appealing doesn't mean it's for you. And so I am really committed to tuning into myself because I think it serves the world the most, and of course me. But ultimately, people, I think, make these choices with short-term desires in mind, and they forget that they need to sustain that career. And so it's like, no matter how big the paycheck or how fancy the title is, those responsibilities are in and out of your life every single day. And if you can't sustain it, which I think is something that we don't get talked to about a lot when it comes to careers, we're talked to a lot about what we want to do, but we're not talked a lot about how to sustain it, how to keep your career going, how to plan your career out. And it makes sense. Like your career changes as you do. We're evolving beings. And who I was, the girl that studied multiple foreign languages, went to grad school and wanted to be Carrie in, Homeland, isn't the girl you're talking to right now. That's just a past version of me that's no longer here. And so I'm willing to see my career as a vehicle for my own self-expression and as a journey, and I'm willing to hold my career lightly so that I can stay more committed to who I am in my heart than what some piece of paper tells me that I should be.
Ashley, can you share with our audience and our listeners that story of coming to the conclusion that this was not for you, even if it was what you imagined to be true, and how you made the decision and then transformed into the woman you are today with U-Turn?
Yeah. I feel like if I go all the way back into grad school, what inspired me to go to grad school, I was living in France, and I remember being in this alleyway, and this man, hit his woman across the face. And I'd never seen domestic violence in front of I've never seen it in front of my eyes like that. Like I've seen it in movies. So, and I know it happens. And so I guess I just was so thrown and in shock. And there was something about that high impact moment that I made it mean I should commit to a career in security, because I was already studying government, and women's rights are a huge issue in national security, counterterrorism, issue-based societies. And so I just made that desire to protect mean that I should work in counterterrorism. And it's so interesting looking back on that moment, how much I made it mean for my career and how quickly I made that decision. So I did everything right. I got the degrees, I learned the languages, I did the internships, and eventually I came back to LA. And I remember being in grad school in London and going to the best school I could to study foreign affairs and security. And I remember all of these moments that I would have where they were like little nudges in my mind. And I talk about this a lot in the book that I wrote, just about like all these little whispers. And I like to call them turn signals, since I'm all about making a U-turn. So little turn signals, little moments that I was off course and I wasn't paying attention. And those moments are very quiet little nudges, often little whispers in your head. And I think the difference between somebody who's fulfilled and someone who's not in their career is simply the relationship that they have with that little voice in their head. And in my case, I just didn't listen to it because it was inconvenient, and having a plan was really nice to have, especially at cocktail parties in the middle of the recession where people were asking me what I wanted to do with my life. So I held on to my shiny little plan. It was a respectable plan. People liked the plan. And I ended up coming back to LA, and I could not get a job to save my life. It was so hard. I had no idea what I was doing. And eventually I got to this place where I just decided that I would take what I could get. So, and I think a lot of job seekers make this mistake of thinking that that's what they need to do. So I ended up as an admin assistant, and after about 6 months into the job, something got into me. I was like, the pain of being here is worse than the pain of changing. And so I reached out to my university and said, do you have a list of alumni who have graduated from this university and moved to DC? And they sent me 2,000 names and emails and phone numbers of people who graduated and moved there. And I worked my way through that 2,000 person list over a month, every lunch break, every day before work, every day after work. I would do emails after work since they were on Eastern time. And I ended up getting like a response rate, maybe like 40 or 50 people responded, and I started having phone calls with them. They started offering their support to me as a new graduate, and I eventually got the confidence to move to DC and land my career in counterterrorism. So that was kind of the beginning. And of course, we all know that didn't end up working, even though I got this awesome job opportunity. And I don't know, sometimes it's really interesting to get the top thing, like the thing that you thought you wanted, the dream, to be able to get. I feel really blessed that I was fast tracked to that dream that I thought I wanted, because it was, it kind of reminds me of, I walked into Pixar once and they had a big sign on the wall that said fail faster. And it was like, cool, I got the highest level of the thing I could have dreamed of, and it's definitely not for me. Thank God I didn't work all of these years to figure that out. And even if I did, that's my path. So I ended up missing job hunting in that process, because I networked so much and I loved people, and I started helping people on the weekends get job offers. And that ended up turning into a career coaching business with online courses. And 10 years later, here I am, I'm still at it.
That's incredible. Do you share your story about making the decision to potentially let people down, your family, your coworkers, to transition into what you actually know you're meant to do?
Do I share my story of letting people down with people that I coach or something like that? And so,
And
yeah.
for them, yeah. Tell me more about.
Yeah, I know a lot of people definitely are holding on to a path in fear that if they don't keep it, they're letting somebody down. And it's so interesting, the amount of clients that I've coached that think that their career, there's a lot of beliefs around time, like that they've wasted time, or that it's too late to begin, or that they're quote unquote starting over, or that they're letting their parents down. But these are all illusions. And I think for me, the key of success for a lot of clients I've worked with is I pay attention to what their narrative really is. And if there's an opening in their narrative, like, are they really buying into that belief that they're out of time, or do they have a little opening, like, but I'm wanting to figure it out anyway? Those are the people that I can create a lot of transformation with.
Amazing. What would you share with our listeners, Ashley, and our viewers about the power of telling your story and when it's too soon and when it's time?
Yeah. As far as like in a client situation or on a stage or anything like that.
A stage.
On a stage, when I tell my story, one of the biggest key ingredients that I hold on to is educating my listener along the way. So if I'm doing a keynote, I'm always thinking about the data that goes into my story. So for example, when I talk about the fact that I don't really like my job, I might use data that 71% of the workforce is job hunting at any given moment. And I believe it's because they don't really like what they're doing and they don't know what to do next, not because they simply want a new job. So I try to educate listeners through my story because sometimes if you just share your story and there's nothing in it for the other person other than inspiration, which is very valuable, I think I try to use my story as a vehicle for education and self-knowledge for other people.
I think that's a really good takeaway for the audience because many speakers go on stage and they're just narrating their life story. And though you are sharing that it can be inspirational, it's important to connect the dots for a listener so that they walk away with action steps and with belief systems.
Yeah.
I would love to hear more about how you prepared, took the TED stage more than once, and what that was like for you.
Yeah. The first time I got a TED Talk was through referral. I'd won an award and I met this amazing woman at the award ceremony for my work in counter-terrorism. And she said that she'd just given a TED Talk at the UN. And it was so interesting because this was like 6, 7, 8 years ago. I was on my way to Istanbul and there was a bunch of protests and I was on a work assignment. And I kind of stopped in DC for this ceremony. And I remember looking at her saying like, oh my gosh, I would love to do that. And I kind of felt vulnerable saying that. Like it feels kind of vulnerable to tell people like, oh, you're doing something so cool. I would love to do that. And I put myself out there. I said that. And she looked at me with this like little smirk. And she was like, oh, I'm sure you'll do one sooner than later. And I didn't really like hold on to it. But next thing I know, like 72 hours later, I was in a spice bazaar and tear gas was going off in the middle of a protest in Istanbul. And I got like a buzz in my phone. And it was like this girl who was like, hey, so-and-so gave me your number. I recommended you for a TED Talk. Hopefully you'll get it. Let me know. I think they're going to take you. And so that was my first TED Talk. I'd never spoken on a stage before, but there's a few things that I learned about that TED Talk. Number one, the formula through which I delivered that first TED Talk was based on what I learned working in the Obama administration. I'd studied how he was as a speaker. So the way that my opening is like kind of intense, and then I have 3 points. I think whenever you have 3 points, or what a lot of speaking coaches might call signposts, it wakes up the audience, and you want to make sure you time them right when people are going to look down and check their little iPhone or something like that. It's just a way of keeping people up and paying attention. And 3 questions, 3 pieces of advice. Signposts can be anything. So that was kind of the format of my talk, was a strong opener, like bringing people into my world, and a few signposts to teach them about themselves. As far as the speaking itself went, I went on stage after Guy Kawasaki, and I'd never spoken before in my life. So I was pretty terrified. I forgot what I was going to say right before they called my name, and then it just downloaded into my head as I was walking on. But I think remembering like you've got to be willing to put in the work if you don't have the mastery. You know, somebody like Guy Kawasaki walks on stages and it's like he's half asleep. He could do it really incredibly well. For me, it took 3 months of practicing 3 hours every day, Monday through Friday. And I walked on that stage and I look back at it now, I'm like, okay, I did a pretty decent job for like a new speaker. Now I'm like, all right, but I could have done so much better. But that was the best I could do at that time, and ended up going viral anyway. I'm really grateful for it getting out there and people listening to it. But ultimately what I learned giving that TED Talk was that there was a ton of other curators from other TEDx's at that event. So if you can manage to go to a large TEDx event whenever events are a thing again, curators usually hang out there, and that's a really good networking opportunity if you do want to get a TED Talk.
Such great advice, Ashley. Can you share with our audience and our listeners what that TED Talk was called and what event that was so they can go and download it right now?
Yeah. So the first TED Talk I gave is called 3 Questions to Unlock Your Authentic Career. And then the second TED Talk I gave more recently that just really made its way out there is called How to Figure Out What You Really Want.
Awesome. These are both amazing talks, everybody. So definitely go watch them. I also want to ask you to go back a little to the Obama administration and to Istanbul and tear gas.
Yeah.
How do you use your life experience in your storytelling and in how you show up in the world as a communicator and as a voice now?
Yeah, I think everybody owes it to themselves to become the most interesting person they ever met. And it's not as a vanity project to show other people how interesting you are, but I think it's for your own self. And I think even right now, so many people have been at home and in reflection more than ever in the times that we're in. And this is such a great time to pick up a new task and something that is meaningful to you, pick up a hobby. I started picking up cooking and fitness, and believe me, like I'm the least fit person I know. And I'm working so hard on like, it's funny. I walk into the gym the first day and the guy's like, this is my hobby. And I'm just watching people like lift the weight, put it down, lift it, put it down. I'm like, how is that a hobby? But I'm starting to kind of get it. And so I think this is a great time for people to build a network if they want to make a career pivot. It's a great time to learn a foreign language if they want to explore that, or get fitness going, or cooking. It's just such a beautiful time. So I'm always on a mission to follow my little nudges and to follow little breadcrumbs of interest that I have. I think people just have a relationship with themselves where if something interesting pops up, they just kind of self-reject really quickly versus like holding on to something that feels expansive. For me as a career expert, I'm interested in what makes people come alive. So whenever I see aliveness on somebody, I'm like, follow that. And for some reason, we're taught not to.
I have never heard anybody say it's your responsibility to be the most interesting person in the room. I love that so much. And I think what you've just done is give our listeners and our viewers permission to stop hiding behind them, a veil, or to pretend to be small for other people's benefit. It's so fantastic to give yourself permission to be the most interesting person in the room.
Yeah.
A bit more about that and how that serves your clients and how you share that with your clients in order for them to do that, to have better and bigger lives.
Yeah, I think that we can create our own destiny. And there's a few ways through which I'm constantly doing that. So the first one is kind of what we talked about, like following nudges. I'm constantly paying attention to where I feel alive. And it's not that I'm like having shiny object syndrome where I'm just running after something. It's often that I'll notice my body tell me to check something out. Like if somebody's talking about something and I feel expansion inside of me when they're talking about it, I just kind of take note like, oh, I should check that out. It's not that I'm going to commit to it, but I'm definitely going to check it out and see if it's something I want to try on. And that's the thing as well, is that I hold my career very lightly. I'm very experimental. And I think that's really served me because it's kind of like that Pixar poster where I'm failing faster. Like what's interesting, what's not. I'm constantly looking at my career as this little gold rush where I'm just sifting through things that are a yes and a no. And I'm not making it mean anything when they're a no. And I'm just noticing when they're a yes. And so I think holding my career lightly has been huge. Secondly, I would say just being a learner. Like, is there classes you can take? Are there books you can read? I find that a question that I think is kind of mistaken that people often ask is like, what's a good book to read? And it's funny, I don't like that question because what's good for somebody right now isn't always good for the other person right now, and it's not going to hold their attention. And according to a lot of research around grit and intelligence, being really smart doesn't always mean you're going to do really well. Being really smart and being interested in something means you're going to do really well. So I find like my curiosity is with books is I never commit to reading the whole book, which is really interesting. Like sometimes I will, sometimes I won't. But I see reading as a tool to scratch an itch that I'm having today. So if today I'm feeling like, like for example, I took my puppy to the vet and I found out he has an illness and it's going to be pretty serious for him. So for me, the itch that I'm scratching is around grief. Like, how do I feel better if my puppy's sick and he's not going to have as long of a lifespan? And so the books that I'm reading are nourishing me right here, right now. And I think about that across the board. Like I'm constantly picking books out that are hitting a spot that is so deep and true in the moment. And I find books to be a part of my ongoing life. So those are a couple things that I'm constantly. And then the final thing with lifelong learner is number 3, I would say is networking. Like if you ever want more magic in your career, just have more conversations. Like that's it. And I think people who feel stuck really just they just lack options. And the reason they lack options is because they haven't taken the time to have more conversations.
Ashley, you're so full of amazing value today. And I also want to say I'm sorry about your puppy.
Thank you. He's such a sweetheart. I mean, I'm also questioning, like, there's no official diagnosis. So I'm just telling myself, like, the human and animal body is very complex and I never know what can change or
Well,
how long they can live.
it's true. And I'll share a story with you. I have two cats, Lola and Bella. And
Oh,
several months ago, Lola was diagnosed with heart disease and in heart failure. And we put her on meds, and I began to focus my attention on her heart. And she's been checked twice since. Her heart is smaller. She is no longer in heart failure and no longer at risk of stroke. So I send you that light and love towards you and your puppy.
thank you. Yeah, the power of the mind and the intention. And, I don't know, I think the medical world is there to diagnose. And I think sometimes even in career coaching, people expect me or want me to put them in a box. And as a content creator, I can look at a personality test and be like, there's 4 different types and which one are you? And often that stuff is helpful, but I don't see it as, I see it as a reference and not as a commitment.
I talk a lot with my speakers about how important it is to stay present in the moment on stage and in life. You are one of the most present guests I've ever had on the show. I'd love to hear how do you make that a practice?
Thank you. Gosh, it's so nice to hear that. I would say, when it comes to my speaking career, I have a rather odd answer of how I stay present. I noticed that a lot of my friends as speakers will channel. They'll come on stage, they don't know what they're going to say. All they say is a prayer. But you're a New Yorker, so you know that living in New York, you pay high ticket prices to see Hamilton. And the reason the price is high is because it's consistent. Hamilton you're going to see on Thursday is Hamilton you're going to get on Friday. And I've learned in my speaking career that you cannot be consistent if you're winging it and if you're channeling. So I have committed I write my talks out with a lot of thought. And I hate to admit it, but I'm more of an actor or an improv person than I am a speaker sometimes, because I've given up my soul to what I'm saying, what I'm writing. And I practice it so much that I know the words in my cells. And then when I get on stage, then I can be present with the audience, because I'm not searching in the depths of my mind for what to say. I'm not in anxiety of whether I'm going to say something that's valuable. I'm in the truth that I wrote what I wanted to say. There's intention that I'm bringing into the room. I've practiced it, and then I get to be present because I've removed the barriers from my presence. So I think presence is more about paying attention to what distracts you. And one thing I've really committed to in my journal is whenever I'm feeling like a lot of thoughts, I just write down all of them. And there's something very emptying about that. And it gets me back to right here and right now, which is all there is,
That's all there is, for sure. I
Yeah.
love you're speaking my language. I work with speakers like I work with my actors, and I teach them objective and action. I tell them about going through that threshold of memorization so that it becomes part of your DNA. That's why you are a great speaker. You can move from good to being great if you practice like you do.
Yeah. And it's really funny that you mentioned that, because it's hard for me I think in the spiritual world, there's a lot of like, it doesn't have to be hard, like don't push yourself, or don't make something hard that doesn't have to be. It can be easy. But I genuinely believe, and a lot of my girlfriends are very powerful speakers. They walk on stage, they channel, and I totally honor it. But I do feel like I have that edge that I'm willing to work. I'm willing to work for something. And because I've worked, I will say usually my talks are a lot more clear and actionable for my listener because I've thought about it. I'm not just hoping. I don't think hope is a strategy. And I learned that in counter-terrorism for sure.
Absolutely. You cannot hope you're captivating every time you take a stage.
Yeah.
But when you have that talk that is so much part of your DNA, then you have the freedom to play on the stage with the audience.
Exactly. And I think as you become a speaker more and more, you have like a repertoire of talks, and then you can become really masterful and kind of create a quilt of all of your talks and pull pieces together and channel in that way. But there's still an informed, intentional reference point in that work.
I love that we have combined counterterrorism with the art of performance today. That is just the most exciting thing ever. Thank you so much, Ashley, for being a featured guest today on The Big Talk. Where can our listeners get in touch with you?
Yeah, thanks for having me. This has been a great conversation. It's not every day I think about my past in counterterrorism, oddly, so it's kind of fun to think about. My book is available. That's like my biggest soul project. It's all about 11 steps to figure out where you truly belong in your work. It's called U-Turn, YOUTURN, at uturnbook.com. Also, I'm on Instagram at Ashley Stahl.
And we'll put all of that in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, everybody. And if you are watching on YouTube, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. Be sure to tune into the next episode. And remember, live your truth, be your authentic self, and drop in. I hope that you will start sharing your powerful story today. And be sure to subscribe and click on that notification bell so that you get access to my newest and latest videos. And I really appreciate that you are here and will always respond to the comments. Big love.